Okay, everybody, welcome to Canary Cry Radio, and my name's Basil.
And this is Gonz. Last week, from this recording anyway, we were, or at least I was on Twitter, kind of looking around, tweeting around, and I saw an old guest of the program, Jay Dyer. He was talking about Bitcoin, and he was talking about the transfer of wealth. And somebody had recommended that we should do a live stream or just a conversation about Bitcoin. And I get a lot of questions about it because Basil, you and I, we've talked about Bitcoin on the show, on News Talk, Canary Cry News Talk, Canary Cry Radio, and we have for a few years. And we've been looking into it because of the fact that we're sort of, we're futurists, we're watchmen, whatever you want to call it. We're looking ahead. And one of the things
relevant conversation.
Sure. And looking at the economic infrastructure, and it's all come to a head this year with the virus and the crash of the economy and the digitization. I don't know, the Ronas. But we wanted to bring Jay Dyer on and have this conversation. So, Jay, what's up, buddy?
Hey, what's up? Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for hanging tight as we got all of our ducks in a row.
I hang tough like the new kids.
I am curious. You've been hanging out with. I saw you hanging out with Alex Jones and a few of the big names out there. How's that been like? Just briefly before we get into all the Bitcoin talk.
It was a lot of fun. Alex is just as wild in person as he seems on air. He was a little ball of energy. Well,
That's
pretty
awesome.
big. He's actually a pretty big guy. So he's a stout little ball of energy.
I was just talking about Alex Jones on our News Talk episode we were just doing about if there's a cage match, how Obama, Bush, and Bill Clinton, they're going to be taking the vaccine to inspire, everybody to think it's safe, So what's more inspiring than that? Watching Bill Clinton get a vaccine to make you want to run out and get it. And then that conversation devolved into a cage match between Alex Jones and the three ex-presidents. And I was saying, Alex seems to be pretty stout, pretty strong guy. I think he could stand a chance.
Yeah, he's a buff dude. He was scarfing down pizza standing right behind me, and I kept looking back because I thought he was going to put me in a headlock like he did Eddie Bravo.
See, all right, so there you go. We know live on air.
Alex Jones choked me out.
Live on air, my predictions about Alex Jones and his cage fighting abilities have been confirmed. So I thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I said this on the last the News Talk, but I'll say it again. I think pay-per-view, Obama or whatever politician with Alex Jones in a ring, or even Alex Jones giving the vaccine, I would pay for it. I would absolutely pay for that, and someone should make it happen. But we wanted to talk Bitcoin because it's hit the news. I mean, a lot of people are asking questions. They want to know, is it the mark of the beast? Is it part of the Great Reset? Is it part of the redistribution of wealth? This conversation is just going to be sort of a discussion. We're just going to chat about it. There's no formal structure with anything. We'll look at the chat and see if people have questions or comments regarding Bitcoin. But just for the audience, Jay, when did you start looking at Bitcoin, and what made you tweet out in the last couple of days about how it might have something to do with the redistribution of wealth?
Well, I had known about Bitcoin for about 10 years. I listened back when a lot of libertarians were talking about it when it was new on the scene. I listened to Max Kaiser would come on Alex Jones all the time back in the day, and I was skeptical at the time. And as you guys noted, that's typically back in your 20s or whatever, you're broke. So I didn't have any money for Bitcoin, but I thought it sounded like a cool idea, but it's just like when you're trying to live week to week, pay the bills, you don't really have extra money for that kind of crazy investment stuff. So I didn't pay much attention. And I have to give credit to not just Max Kaiser, but to the guys over at the Crypto Show. I don't know if they still do that podcast, but they did it for years. And they were actually the first ones to tell me to get into it, and they were going to give me freaking straight up Bitcoins. Back in the day, they were like, just open up a wallet and we'll send you Bitcoins. And I was like, oh yeah, open up a wallet. What does that mean? I didn't even know what that meant. What are you talking about?
Right.
And so to me, it sounded shady. And I think everybody goes through those same phases and stages where it's like, oh, here's the new guy trying to scam me into something. Get a wallet, dude, and I'm going to send you this magical electronic money, and you're going to be rich in 10 years. And it's like, yeah, whatever, dude. So anyway, but I held off for a long time. I was really skeptical. I think I even wrote an essay or two about how I thought this was ridiculous. And then, the more that you learn about this kind of stuff, you read into it, you see that you were wrong. Your initial impressions were wrong. A lot of times we have kind of negative assessments of things, probably because we get into a black pill mode, that kind of thing, where we, this is the next scam. This is the next scam. So everything's a scam. And then it was about, I guess, 2016, late 2016, early 2017, where I just listened to more and more, economic podcasts and interviews with guys into Bitcoin. I listened to tons and tons of videos, documentaries, and then I finally just realized that there's just a lot more pros than there are cons. We can go into all that, but this is long-winded to just say about 2016, 2017 is when I started kind of investing slowly and then more and more gradually into, when we had that first 2017, debacle. That sucked, but it was actually good to go through that volatility. Yeah, because then, not just for Bitcoin, but just on a personal level, it was good to ride that out and to know that, if this kind of a thing happens in the future, I'm not going to be that worried about it. So anyway, long story short, about 4 years.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you talk about the sort of mindsets of people as they learn more about Bitcoin and get into Bitcoin. There's a huge learning curve, or at least especially back in 2016 when it really first made a dramatic public entrance, I suppose. With just what you're saying, you got to get a wallet. It's on a blockchain. I don't know what that is. I don't know if I should be impressed or what. And is digital money? Well, how is that different from, dollars? Dollars are already digital in my bank account, et cetera, et cetera. The learning curve is pretty drastic. There's college campuses now that have cryptocurrency classes or blockchain classes, just to learn the basics of what's going on. And I think a part of that cycle that we've all been through is, like you mentioned, that's too much. That's too different. It's too, we would call it now a paradigm shift in currency, especially since, hey, fiat currency got us this far. It got me my car. It pays my bills. Why do I need anything else? And, you mentioned libertarians. The interesting thing, even with certain libertarians, they don't seem to realize that one aspect of fiat currency sitting in your bank account, I won't even talk about cash, but, credit or dollars in your online banking, if you send that to someone or you want to do anything like that, you're not just sending it to someone as in an envelope you're putting in their mailbox. You're literally giving your money away to some third party with some sort of faith that they will do what you ask with it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of one of the things that obviously is a big paradigm shift that I think a lot of people don't fully grasp with Bitcoin. So if you're listening live now and you're wanting to know the differences, if you were going to transfer money to your kid's account, you're sending them burrito money for college or something, you send $100 through your bank account, that money could change hands with at least one, but probably several different middlemen companies who simply just make money by taking your money, moving it to one place. They take it, they move it to another place. It's this whole system, and we'll get talking into world systems, economies, economic systems, and eventually beast systems or whatever. However, you want to take that conversation. But what Bitcoin does is it takes away any need well, for the most part, with some exceptions, but it takes away any need for a middleman to touch your money, which should be a pretty cool idea to people, but they're so resistant to it. What kind of experience have you had with people who kind of have that kind of thinking? And what would you say to them?
So, like you said, it's a learning curve, as with everything, on the internet. When Facebook comes out, there's a learning curve when people start using it. When people start using Twitter, there's a learning curve. I witness people even right now who come into the Discord. Of course, a lot of people, 25 and younger, are far more interested in using Discord, for example, as a social media application than Facebook. Facebook is primarily a lot of boomers, and the point being is that we can see an analogy between the shift from Facebook to what exists now with Discord, or what will be in the future, probably to a similar shift in paradigm when it comes to what you're talking about with money, monetary exchange, stores of value, wealth, the logic behind the storing of energy, and that monetary transactions, or that money itself represents and is a way to objectively represent your energy. And that's the logic that I think was the final straw for me to figure out that this is not just, e-commerce. It's not just e-money. It has multiple positives, multiple pros that make it a much more honest and ethical system. And so I think the biggest hurdle still is, number one, people don't understand why it's a thing or why it matters. They don't understand why it's ethical. They don't understand why it's more logical. And they don't understand the concept of, energy transference and stores of value and all that kind of stuff. Because a lot of people don't invest. I mean, it's a small portion of the population that does look into and study economics. And those of us who, came from the conspiracy world or are in that world or whatever, in a way, we had an advantage because we knew about the Federal Reserve. If you were into Ron Paul back in the day, you knew about the problems of fiat currency, Federal Reserve. So I think a lot of people are, especially given the way that they've done the quantitative easing and the money printing stimulus stuff in the last few years, and especially the last year, people are starting to feel it and figure out that there's something wrong with the way our monetary system works. It's all built on debt. It's built on gigantic amounts of debt, which is just insane. Yeah. And it's not just that it's usury based and fraudulent. It's theft. And so if it's theft, it's immoral. Yeah. So if you want to move in the direction of ethical money, you could argue, okay, well, the dollar was at one point, on a gold standard, and it was at least less likely to be manipulated. I'm sure it was manipulated when it was on a gold standard. You can manipulate gold. There was a big fee that JP Morgan just paid for that. But the point being is that there's just so many pros as opposed to the cons. And I think the stumbling block is explaining and educating people to the pros and the cons. And that's the hardest part.
Yeah, I would agree.
And this could be a question for you too, Gonz. I'm curious on the cons. We all know the pros, and we're going to be talking about the pros all the time. But I have trouble really getting a good list of cons from people who don't think that it's just a scam offhand. Like legit from somebody who knows about it, what kind of cons are we looking at? That could be for either of you.
Well, before we do the cons, I want to mention how, when I didn't grow up with any kind of understanding of finance and money. There was no, and I talked to Robert Kiyosaki. I interviewed him a couple years ago, and he had a book out called Fake, and he says everything's fake, and how we just don't get a financial education because they don't want us to know exactly how the banking system works. They don't want us to know how any of it works. Because what was that quote? Who's the quote? I forget who it was. Somebody said that it was a quote from about 60 years, maybe 80 years ago, president that said if the public knew about how the banking system worked, there'd be a revolution by morning. So a lot of the sentiments of the system I was learning about. I learned about Jekyll Island and all this kind of stuff, but it seemed like there was nothing really to exit the system. And, buy gold, buy silver. Yeah, that was an option. But I still think gold and silver have value and monetary value and will for a long time. It's one of the oldest forms of money, and money itself being, just a store of value. And like you mentioned, this a currency being a slightly different thing, an exchange, a medium of exchange, where you can trade value, and you called it energy, value, energy, same kind of deal. There was no way to exit, especially with the digital world. Everything just seemed like, it's all controlled by the top and everything's controlled, and it's hard to imagine anything that could come along that can help out with that. And I think once I started learning about Bitcoin, I learned more about how the financial system works. I learned more about how everything worked and why it was so corrupt.
Yeah.
We can get into, again, we'll mention more of the pros and stuff, but for anybody listening who's sort of new to the idea of Bitcoin, just real briefly in a sentence, all Bitcoin is, with a capital B, it's a protocol for a decentralized P2P, which is peer-to-peer network that creates consensus without needing a central authority to provide trust. So I know it sounds confusing, but it's not that confusing if you break it down.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful. Like if somebody's new, so many words within there mean nothing.
Sure, so, I guess.
Not to bring you down, Gonz, but that's part of the thing. When I try to talk to somebody about Bitcoin, reading them the official definition brings up more questions than it does answers.
Sure, I guess, but it's an honest way to exchange value without a middleman is the easiest way to put it.
Peer to peer, being the main thing.
Sure.
Just for a jumping off point, Russell in the YouTube says cons, one of them being loss of privacy, and that's incorrect.
It's semi correct.
I don't think so. I mean, on its base, it's pretty incorrect because you think of using money online, just using dollars. Everything is attached to that.
Yeah.
You got a bank account; it's got everything. You have no privacy when you spend $1 online. When you send a Bitcoin, just for anybody who doesn't understand how the wallet system works and stuff, you can check any account on the blockchain. And you can see any account and how much is in there and every transaction within that account. So in that degree, you can look at people's quote unquote, Bitcoin bank accounts. But the privacy comes from there's literally no attachment to you as a human being or your legal entity as defined by any sort of government. So I still maintain it's almost entirely anonymous unless you've got some pretty good, forensic, digital forensic hackers out there who can trace all sorts of stuff. But a normal, a normal actor, you are entirely private.
Sure. Sort of. The analogy that I like is that it's like having a whole bunch of lockers that are clear, and you can see the money inside the locker, and you can see the money being moved around from locker to locker, but you don't know exactly who owns the locker. Yeah. So that's sort of the way visually. But
that's a good way to explain it.
Yeah, but part of it too, there are organizations. Chain Analysis is like a government sponsored or a government organization, basically, or government funded organization that tries to keep track of everybody as much as possible, who owns Bitcoin, who's moving whatever. So that stuff is out there, and your IP address can give you away, or at least somewhat give you away, unless you're using a VPN or something. It gets pretty technical. But if you're talking about cash transfer, like physical paper cash, that's probably the most private in terms of a transaction. Like you can buy something with pieces of paper in a little shop, and no one has to know about it unless there's like a security camera or something like that. But the problem is with paper cash, that's the fiat part of it. We're sort of agreeing to, because I see a lot of people online talk about, they're pushing a cashless society. It's all going downhill. And then I started asking the question, so what is cash? And it's really it's paper. And I've talked about the example before. What's the difference between a piece of paper that says 1 and a piece of paper that says 100? Well, it's just, we've all just agreed that 1 has more value, so it's kind of like, okay, it's a magic trick almost. Like, we're just being fooled to believe that these different pieces of paper have money. And so the difference there with Bitcoin in terms of the value or the amount is that, like you said, Basil, you can see it on a blockchain. You can see it. It's all transparent in that way where you can't really fake it. And that was kind of the big breakthrough with Bitcoin too, is being able to create digital scarcity. I hope I'm not using words that are too big there, where in the past, anything digital, you can cut and paste, cut, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste, and you can just create more and more and more, which is kind of what the Federal Reserve does with dollars. They just kind of hit print and, there's just all this money being printed. You can't do that with Bitcoin. There's some hard caps as to how it's created and the amount that will ever be created. And so that's kind of what you were talking about, Jay, the transparency and all that. But let me, in terms of the negative aspect of it, and we can sort of get into how viable these concerns are. One, and I already saw it in the chat, why would you invest in something that's the beast system? Why it's the beast system? And it's like, okay, think about what your dollar bill already is. It's got the all-seeing eye on the back.
Yeah, right.
It's you're already using the beast system, so it's like, all right, it's not really that different. But other concerns that are brought up often is, what if an EMP happens? What happens with an EMP, guys? If there's an EMP and it wipes out all electronics, what happens? And I think it's you have to be specific about that too, because okay, an EMP wipes out America, then what? If it wipes out the whole world, then what? So those are different scenarios, and the results will be different. But go ahead, Jay.
No, I think you're right to call out kind of these common. We were getting a lot of these last night. We did a stream with Julia from Brave the World, and we were talking about Bitcoin. She's a big Bitcoin proponent, and we were getting all the kind of the same, FUD in the chat, and the fears, the uncertainties, the doubts, the the worries. My principle in response to that is always, anything that you say against Bitcoin can be leveled against the dollar like 10 times worse. Right. Most of the time, like 9 out of 10 times, right? So if you want to talk about the dangers of it being stolen, your money hacked, okay, that's all applicable to the US dollar in terms of banks collapsing, in terms of inflation, in terms of money printing, and especially what they've been doing with the stimulus. We know with the incoming government, or the one that's trying to come in, that they absolutely intend to do more money printing. And so that's just more theft and devaluation of your purchasing power, your dollar, your currency. It's just there's no logic behind staying in something that over time you're going to have stolen and lose the value of it. It would be like having gold, and the gold like melts, 5 or 10% every year. Would you want melting gold? No, you would want like real gold, right? So Bitcoin is just gold 2.0. It's e-gold, and it functions like that, but it has advantages over any of the traditional currencies or forms of money or whatever, because of the reasons you gave, right? There's the limitation. It can't be inflated. There is, if you have the ethical view that usury is wrong, then why wouldn't you want to use a monetary system that can't be based around usury and interest and inflation? Now, people individually who have Bitcoin can, of course, engage in usury. That can never fully be stopped. But in terms of the system itself, it's a closed system. And so it can't be altered. It's not going to turn into the opposite of itself 10 years from now. There's not going to be some guy that comes along and prints a zillion more Bitcoin to make it, worthless. So it's like Michael Saylor said in his really excellent interviews, because he explains it from an engineering standpoint, which I think is the most convincing when you understand the logic of it. He says, if you look at what happened with the rise of the internet, right? Here we are 20 years into the internet. If you're going to say everything, beast system that, well, the internet's the beast system. Why are you even on the internet? Get off the internet if you're going to take that rigorous approach. Do you have online banking? That's part of the beast system, right? I mean, it's just it's not consistent logic and argumentation here. So we put energy and time into social media. We put energy and time into Instagram, putting photos on there. We put energy and time into music becoming MP3s. And that's what we're doing, right, with money. We're moving to a better system. That's why it's a paradigm change. And that's why when people figure out that that's what it is and that you can store your money without losing it, even with the volatility that it has, you're still better off than the dollar or even gold. Then at that point, again, the risk is lower with Bitcoin from that vantage point than it is with fiat currency.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And bringing in the Bible, or at least biblical times here, the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible, there's a whole section on coins and stuff, and I was reading it, and it was interesting because it said that the general acceptance of coinage as a medium of exchange, like once they started using coins instead of just weights and what was it, shekels and stuff, it says it did not stamp out fraud. And coins were sometimes minted from inferior metal and coated with silver. For that reason, many ancient coins show a sharp gash, which proved that the coin was silver throughout. Such clipping of coins was common from antiquity until well into the 18th century, when coins began to be minted with milled edges. So even back then, even 2,000 years ago, when they were using coins, like the first time coins came around, people were still skeptical. They had to verify it. They had to verify the coin, and we're just doing that with a digital. There's a digital way to do that now, and that's all this is. I'm not saying it's going to save the world, but in terms of progress and sovereignty when it comes to your digital money,
freedom. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because like we talked about at the top of everything, a lot of the enslavement or the suppression and oppression around the world is economic. Economics is what drives a lot of the inequality and all that kind of stuff. If there's a way to not allow government to redistribute that wealth, but just a neutral, I don't know, what's a distributor of that, then something like Bitcoin would facilitate that a little bit better than any government. And that's why a lot of governments are afraid. And that's why I think central banks are starting to talk about CBDCs, central bank digital coins, and Libra, which are just rebranded to Diem. They're going to have a dollar stable coin out there. All these institutions have to adopt this because they realize that, oh, shoot, the people are regaining power economically. And if it gets out of hand and the people all do it, then really the governments and large institutions will lose power, and that's really pretty crazy to think about in this time we're living in, where we think that it's all going to hell in a handbasket. And surely there's a lot of problems there. There's the Great Reset and Build Back Better and all this kind of. They're out there, they're doing it, but it's also, I think they accelerated a lot of that because of the fact that there is a way for people to opt out of the system, at least economically. In limited terms. You can't completely, as long as we're in the world, we're sort of stuck in certain things. But in terms of just the system itself, there are options. So, but speaking to the EMP thing, if the EMP takes out, whatever, half the world, all the world, it would have to be the whole world, because that's part of the strength of Bitcoin is this idea of decentralization, and you don't have just one central point of failure where, okay, let's say all of America goes out, electricity goes out in America completely, internet goes down,
shut down every computer in the world,
and you'd have to do it forever, basically, because as soon as it comes back on, if you have one ledger, or at least two,
verification starts back up, and
you're fine. So and if you think about the near term with Starlink, they're trying to get internet all over the world, and that has its own eschatological concerns. But in the meantime, I don't think the elite are going to so easily take down their surveillance apparatus. They're not going to just be like, oh, EMP everybody, because they're part of it too. If you take it down, then they're taking down their whole apparatus. So,
another thing that you guys and myself have as an advantage, maybe over people that are 20 or 25, is that we've lived to see quite a few scares that came with the internet, and a few of the fake bubbles and a few of the fake concerns. Remember Y2K?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is going to shut down all the internet and all the computers in the world, and it's going to be chaos. And it was nothing. We've seen some real bubbles, .com bubble, this kind of stuff. Yeah. But I think over time, what we see is that we get past certain stages and things, and people aren't as afraid of engaging in or using those technologies. And I think that's what is the situation with Bitcoin, is that we've moved past the fear phase and the skepticism phase. I mean, for the important people who are going to change the paradigm, there's still a lot of people who are afraid and who are skeptical, but they're just behind, right? I mean, if you keep up with the stuff that we keep up with, typically we're 10 to 15 years ahead of the curve when it comes to news, trends, and understanding, right? All of us in the alt media, generally speaking, conspiracy world, we do kind of see these things ahead of time. At least we have a pretty good track record. So I think that it's just pretty obvious that there hasn't been a real competitor to destroy or take the place of Bitcoin. There's some other, things that could go alongside of it. But why would you not, again, prefer something that's a more ethical version than the present completely unethical fiat system, especially given the fact that, so many times in the Bible, monetary principles are mentioned, just weights and measures it talks about in Proverbs. Christ uses in his, parables so many monetary analogies. The idea that we're not supposed to have, objective Christian ethics for money is false. That's a silly notion. That's why, for example, for the first 1,000 years of the church, typically speaking, usury was not allowed, and the church fathers wrote against it because it was a way to enslave, and it was an unfair, unethical practice to do that. In the realm of Christendom. So now after the Renaissance period, that was abandoned, and we got the reintroduction of the papacy, for example, allowing usury. Many of the reformers also favored the practice of usury. And this, in part, is what has led us to the present system in the world where we have this international kind of, debt-based system. I mean, there's other influence as well, but you get the point that I'm making, is that we have been for centuries under a slavery-based system, and I don't think that, ethically speaking, it's correct to do that to people. It's just another version of theft. So if you do care about ethics in monetary policy, which everybody who at least got into the Federal Reserve stuff and, the Ron Paul stuff 10 years ago has that concern, I can't see how you would disagree with the logic of Bitcoin. And just to play devil's advocate, we were talking about the possible cons. The only con that I can see, and I've thought about this for years, is that there is the nation state. The typically money printing occurs via the nation state. Saylor makes a good argument that still probably will never go away. So my only concern is that could Bitcoin be subversive and destroy the nation state? I don't think so, because it's still, there's still going to be the central bank printed coins like you're talking about. They're never going to be able to beat or compete with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will force them to be more ethical, because people will just move to Bitcoin if they inflate. So the logic of it, is just irresistible. So even if I guess my argument is, from a pragmatic standpoint, even if it is subversive to the nation state, and if that's a bad thing, if our nation states aren't already completely corrupt, then it still is advantageous, because we're at the point where, for those of us who are, Christian, for those of us who want ethical money and to do the right thing and to guard against Great Reset and this kind of stuff, the logic of it pragmatically says you should have some Bitcoin. Yeah. And I'm not saying you can't have gold either, right?
Yeah. Well, that seems to be one of the big criticisms that you get from anti-Bitcoiners. First of all, usually people who are super anti-Bitcoin just learned about it and they're still struggling with it. That's almost entirely always the case. If you spend enough time learning about it, you eventually see what's going on. Oh, shoot. What did you just say? I just lost my entire train of thought. That's what I get for having chat right in front of me. I need to get
I was just thinking about the nation state, and The point is
right.
just that, well, they're already collapsing our nation state, so you might as well hedge against it,
Yeah, well, and exactly. So, and that's the thing, a lot of the context of, a resistance against Bitcoin is that, you can't just use it. You can't, the dollars are so much easier. But it's like you kept saying, it's like gold. It's, even a gold coin, you wouldn't run around and give somebody a gold coin for something right now. There needs to be this expansion, like you say, referring to it as an exchange of energy, or as Gonz explained, as a unit of value or something. You're not using it for purchases right now, at least. I mean, nobody's really spending Bitcoin on a day-to-day basis. There's ways you can, but it's not really its main use case. It really is a hedge against the future. Gold bugs, they don't go out and buy gold because they want to spend that at Walmart more than they want to spend $1. Same with Bitcoin. You got to have a forward thinking. It really is a resistance type of mindset, which makes me laugh when people try to make the case that, Bitcoin is, was created by central banks to trick people. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know who Satoshi is. But why would they create
Your fiat
something?
Currency was created by a central bank to trick people.
right.
It's even
it
worse.
Always
Again,
goes back to it always goes back to oh, so you love dollars. That's fine. You stay in dollars. I'll get my Bitcoin, or gold or silver. And you make a good point. Like any store of value, you want to diversify in whatever way works for you. Again, I'm not a financial planner, so none of this is advice, but just my own experience. But the fun part about it is it really is more of a rebellion against an established system. I mean, it's a rebellion against corrupt nation states and global economics and world banks and things like that. It's also if you gave me the choice between having $1,000 in dollar bills that all had the all-seeing eye and a serial number and a magical seal that binds me to the magic bag of Hermes, or whatever occult symbolism you want to take off of a dollar bill, or just the line of code, I'll take the line of code any day. I mean, I might take some gold too, but it really is almost included in it, and this is what gets me fired up a lot, and excuse me, I don't get to talk about it that much. It's almost has like a spiritual significance of detaching yourself from whatever the system of the world, the beast system, the
exactly
occultic origins of our government, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I totally agree. That's another good point, is that people are always talking about how can I not participate in this existing evil system? Well, here's one example, one way you could. And again, the other thing that's annoying in the objectors is there's always the, well, what about this problem? As if there's some silver bullet that's going to solve every. There's no
right.
That's going to solve every possible problem. That's a stupid objection. So, get past all that stuff. It's not going to matter. Again, every argument that you level against this kind of a currency, a cryptocurrency, or actually just, digital gold, it's applicable to all the other. Now, let me also address, okay, so if there's an EMP and if everything collapses, guess what? All of your money in the bank is not going to be
very much.
That's right.
Right.
So the dollar's probably going to be worthless too. In that case, maybe having some gold would be advantageous, but again, how are you going to destroy the entire internet? I mean, that's very unlikely. And if we do reach that scenario, Bitcoin's not going to matter, nor is the dollar.
Yeah, we're going to have some much bigger problems. Not accessing our Bitcoin. Yeah. Now, I do want to mention, because I see a lot of people chatting about different cryptocurrencies. I think generally, you can apply a lot of these to many cryptocurrencies. All cryptocurrencies are not created equal, and there are some real duds out there. You probably don't have as much advantages, at least, than Bitcoin does. I don't even know if I want to get into talking too much about other cryptocurrencies, because Bitcoin is such a a great catch-all for the broader concepts that we're talking about. But yes, that there are many different kinds of cryptocurrencies that you can apply these concepts to.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any that I necessarily want to get really excited about on the show, but if you have any, feel free to bring it up, I suppose.
I mean, I've gambled a little bit this year because I had a little bit of extra money that I had attained from some of the gains. And so I played around and just did some gambling and trading, and I made a little bit, not a whole lot, but I guess if you want to, take some risks like that. But in the long term, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the time, really to spend all day, studying every single different, altcoin to try to figure out which one is going to be the next, 10%, 20% rise. But, I'm sure some of these are going to be around and will be along with Bitcoin. But the great thing about Bitcoin is the simplicity. Like once you kind of get the basics of it, it's very unlikely that that's going to go away. And so it's just a lot easier unless you're some sort of day trader, live on the edge, dude. It's just simpler if you want to be a hodler or something like that.
Yeah, day traders. I've looked into. I kind of studied a lot of that in the last few years, and day trading is like the worst thing. It's like I don't know. You got to be like a true degenerate. I'm nothing bad against people who are day trading. I envy you. You guys, you guys have a lot of
degenerate.
That's kind of the mindset, though. It's actually become like a crypto meme to call yourself a degen. But
that's funny.
Yeah, but one of the things you mentioned, altcoins. I have probably more knowledge with a lot of altcoins than I'd like to. I spend too much time reading up on it and looking at it and stuff. There's so many different ones, and there is a big difference with Bitcoin and something like Ethereum, who's the second biggest crypto, and the main use case being smart contracts, and it gets into a whole another rabbit trail of how. Not just money, but different types of contracts in general can be deployed on smart contracts that use blockchain technology and all that. But I do want to mention a couple things. One, blockchain technology existed before Bitcoin. So, people always say they sort of think of it as synonymous, but blockchain existed before Bitcoin. And so just keep that in mind that Bitcoin utilized the blockchain technology to create digital scarcity. Secondly, and this is something
just a fun fact to throw out there. Blockchain was first written about in IBM papers in the 80s.
Yes, so a long time ago.
At least the idea and some proto, ancestors of blockchain existed back in, I think it was 1987 was the publication date.
I think I've seen papers on digital money, like true digital money, like peer-to-peer in 82 or 83 is something that I found in the past. But I think 87 was the IBM paper. But, and also, just so people are aware that we are aware, the main encryption that takes place on Bitcoin is called SHA-256, SHA-256. That is an encryption mechanism that was discovered or breakthrough, whatever, by the NSA. Mm-hmm. So the NSA did, come up with the SHA-256 algorithm, as an encryption mechanism. And so, yes, that is utilized in Bitcoin. But that doesn't necessarily mean the NSA is 100% behind it. There could be white hats in there.
Came up with the internet and computers, so
right,
yeah,
stop using the computer then.
Yeah. So yes, we are aware of those things. And I saw somebody in the chat mention how we talk and warn about AI and quantum computers and stuff all the time. What about that? Quantum computers, could that destroy the entire idea of Bitcoin? What do you guys think? I'll share my thoughts later, but I'll throw it to Jay.
Yeah. I want to know what Jay thinks.
I mean, I know a little bit about this topic, not a whole lot. I've looked into it some over the past few years. I think a lot of that, I'm not saying there are no quantum computers. I'm just saying a lot of this is kind of speculation and science fiction predictions. Sure, I'm not too worried. I'm not too worried about that. And I mean, to me, I put that in the category of like, will the AI come alive? I don't think so. No, AI is not conscious. So I think that's an irrational fear or concern to have. And by the way, if that's the case, then all the monetary networks
problem
in the world are screwed up.
same issue. If
it's on the same level as the EMP problem.
Exactly.
If somebody is maliciously using quantum computers to hack Bitcoin accounts, there are way bigger problems than the Bitcoin you have stored away. That is the complete dissolution of all digital security on Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at with that too. And I had to. It took me a while to get to that conclusion because I always was thinking like that is a problem with quantum computers if they're able to utilize it the way they are. But there's a lot of factors here. One being who is the one using it, and secondly, I mean technically, when you're talking about like the technology side of things, it's very very hard, at least right now, to implement quantum computing in the way it's theoretically going to be able to assess every possibility in the universe and come up with the answer and all this kind of stuff. It's very hard to get there. Theoretically, it's coming along, but it's also a communal thing. There's a lot of different quantum computing languages that are being developed now that are compatible with different programming languages that exist now. So it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, but with Bitcoin being a protocol, a digital protocol, it can be upgraded. And that's the other thing is with your fiat money, it's kind of like whatever we get from the government, that's what it is. And especially with CBDCs and if they come out with a digital dollar, like a true official digital dollar, the government can track every single movement of that, and they can take away your money, they can give you your money. It's not good.
Yeah.
But with Bitcoin, because you can upgrade the protocol, you can make it quantum resistant when that time comes, and that'll just depend on the community of people that are like, hey, let's make this happen. And for now, the people that are developing Bitcoin seem to have the best interest of the people. That could change. We're not saying that couldn't change. But for example, the next big update on Bitcoin is something called Taproot, and that's supposed to improve speed. It's supposed to improve privacy. Even more than it already is. So, that's kind of the beauty of it is that it's all based on math, Yeah. And there's an objectivity to all of this that doesn't exist with the current financial system.
Right.
So that's kind of my answer to the quantum computing criticism.
I think one of the biggest risks when it comes to cryptocurrency, and this is more on like a societal, global level, or pancake if you're a flat earth or whatever the earth is to you. It's like Bitcoin is not the biggest concern. My biggest concern is like a major full-scale adoption of some state or corporate-controlled digital currency, like Libra or Diem or U.S. The U.S. government one is. Yeah. Sure, yeah. I mean, there is a world in which, like, I'll just say Libra becomes so easy and available to people who have a Facebook account. And there's sort of a deception where they think, oh, it's like Bitcoin, only it's way easier. I can just get it here on Facebook. This will be great. Okay, now I'm a cryptocurrency man. And then, and that's the point where people are really going to get hoodwinked, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the mistake is that people are thinking, oh, this Bitcoin's a scam. When Facebook and the central governments put out their coins, people will start using them. Then they're going to realize, oh, yeah, now I'm being scammed. And it was Bitcoin that would have been the haven, not the scam. So unfortunately, although I'm not saying this is ethical, but I think that it's almost like it's kind of an IQ test. You know what I mean? Like, are you really going to trust Facebook or the central government? Something that at least gives you a degree of personal sovereignty and freedom over your attained, energy. You're storing time and the effort and power and energy that you put into your products, into your work. And if you pay taxes every year, like I do, you know how much of that is stolen. I mean, I think that it's much more logical to people that have a business than the people who aren't, investing money or don't run a business. They don't really, I mean, I remember before I had a business, I didn't really think about economics other than from a conspiratorial vantage point. But if I had thought about it in more of a logical investing way, when I was a wage worker, wage cuck, I should have just taken some portion and invested it, and I would have been way better off. So that's what I'm trying to put across here, is that if you are in a situation of poverty, in a situation of wage slavery or whatever, this is still the best option for you. That alone, I think, is a big positive for the people.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those listening, I've seen it a couple times in the chat, and I think this is one misunderstanding with Bitcoin. You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin at a time, folks. You could put $10 from each of your paychecks. Forego one McDonald's meal and put it towards Bitcoin or anything. I mean, it just generally in with an investment mindset. I kind of cringe a little bit with some investing guys and how they kind of make it sound easier than it really is for people earning a wage to put money aside. So I don't want to be that guy, but I can only say that because that was me. And to a degree, it is me. Sometimes you can put in as little as possible, just so you know out there. An easy way to do it would not necessarily be the way I would maybe walk my parents step by step to do it, but an easy way to do it would just get a Coinbase account and just fix $10 to each from each paycheck.
I will say Coinbase keeps going down.
We don't need to talk about it. That's what I'm saying.
Coinbase keeps going down every time Bitcoin goes up in price.
Oh my gosh,
it's a conspiracy.
Philosophically, there are plenty of services out there that make it easy to get Bitcoin. Yeah. There are also very complicated, safer ways, but there's also easy ways. But so just so everybody out there doesn't think we're just like a bunch of internet jerks, assuming everybody, has the money or the time. If you got $10, it's worth having, because I mean, if in the world where Bitcoin does become an important thing to have, the guy that has $10 worth is going to be infinitely more well off than the guy who has zero or girl.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's something to keep in mind, because the number of Bitcoin that can ever exist is 21 million full Bitcoins, like whole Bitcoins. It's divisible up to 8 decimal places. So the same way you have dollars are divisible to the 10th, so 2 zeros after the period there. There's 8 decimal places afterwards. So it's and each unit of Bitcoin is called a Satoshi, for anyone who is not aware. And so you can buy just a few handful of Satoshi, and kind of dollar cost average is what it's called, your way in. And I think as we have this conversation here in 2020. We're almost, this conversation is almost like late in some regard. I mean, we're still very early in the larger scheme of things, but, Jay, you brought up Michael Saylor a couple times, and Michael Saylor is the CEO of a company called MicroStrategy. And MicroStrategy is a publicly traded company. They've been around for a long time. I think they started in the 80s. I mean, they owned some of the top domains and stuff. Like, Michael Saylor's been in software for a long time, and his whole thing was there's all these companies, Fortune 500, all these institutions, all these family-owned, not banks, but what am I thinking? Just family wealth, agencies and stuff like that. They all have this fiat, and this is his words, it's on fire. Yeah. It's all losing value extremely quickly.
I mean, they're all going to figure this out, right?
Yeah. And so Michael Saylor, this is like 2 or 3 months ago, he didn't even know much about Bitcoin at the beginning of this year. And he was just trying to figure out, okay, how do I keep my money? How do I keep all this money that his wealth, basically, that he's created with this company for the last 30, 40 years, whatever. And, I think I've heard interviews with him talking about, okay, a bank in South America somewhere was holding, several million, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we were trying to figure out how to get that money into an American bank account, and it just was impossible without losing, just bleeding out, it wasn't hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was like millions of dollars that you'd have to pay the middleman to even get that money out. And it would take forever and all this kind of stuff. And, he was trying to talk to some of his expert team or whatever. And they're like, well, you can buy a cruise ship and you can take that cruise ship to America and then sell the cruise ship and you can store your wealth that way. And so he's like, this is ridiculous. There has to be something else. And that's when he ran into Bitcoin and started looking into it and realized, wait a minute, it's already here. It's already been here. Yep. And so as soon as people start to realize, the big corporations start to realize that the fiat money is on fire and it's burning down. And just not to be too conspiratorial, but the 1988 cover where there's a rising phoenix out of the burning ashes of the dollar, the fiat dollar. Yeah.
The Economist magazine.
The Economist magazine cover, that it's been planned, I think. They've always known fiat never lasts. Every single fiat experiment falls apart. And really in the United States, people don't realize this, but the dollar fiat experiment is not that old. I think it's like, what is it? 1971 is when they went off the gold standard. So
it's like 50 years old.
It's like 60 or 70 years old. It's not like this long-lasting thing. And look at all the problems it has caused all around the world, just destroying nations in 50 years. Yeah. So you got to think.
A couple years ago, my girlfriend at the time, wife now, we were thinking about how money that we had in savings, it wasn't a whole lot, but how it was going down in value. Right. I was just looking at inflation charts about what you could buy in the 90s because I graduated high school in 97. So I remember, when you get your paycheck and you go, and back in the 90s, you go buy CDs, like you get your whole paycheck and you buy CDs. And I was just thinking about not monetary CDs. I mean, like a CD, right? Like I go buy my, Green Day CD or whatever I bought, but
Dookie.
But I'm thinking about how the purchasing power, like, drastically has gone down, and how even from the 90s inflation is crazy. So with what they're doing in terms of this crazy stimulus stuff to get everybody on the dole, to debase the dollar, we just started thinking about how it would be more sensible to, instead of having money just sitting in the bank in cash losing value, to put it into gold. Now that was before I really thought about the logic of Bitcoin. And at the time too, 3 or 4 years ago, it was still kind of iffy about what kind of volatility and where Bitcoin was going to go. And there's a lot of hurdles, I think, to get past the time of the 2017 period. But I started realizing, even thinking back then, maybe doesn't this just remove the need for the middleman? Why do I need my bank and the money sitting there in cash, depreciating in value? Why not just use Bitcoin as a savings account? And so the logic of that, once I realized that money that we put in gold, yes, we had made a little bit on gold over the last 3 or 4 years because it went from, 1,300 to 1,800. But even still, the gains there compared to the gains in Bitcoin were nothing. I mean, it's just like what I had made in money that I had in crypto was way better than anything from gold. So I actually put my money where my mouth is too. And I got rid of all the gold. Again, not to say that I won't ever buy gold back, but I sold all the gold to move it all into Bitcoin because I am convinced of the logic of it.
Yeah. And, the logic, you keep mentioning the logic, and it makes a whole lot of sense logically. But the thing that really kills me, and again, maybe I'm harping on the same harp the whole time, but you think about who really benefits from you not buying Bitcoin. For you defending the dollar and the current system, and, for whoever's out there just like really stoked on the all-seeing eye, they're just so pumped. But who benefits from you, dear listener, holding on to as much cash as possible? Because it's certainly not you. I mean, the depreciation, et cetera, you holding on to cash is not benefiting you. Who is it benefiting? And I'm assuming it's the government and trying to hold up a rickety scaffolding of legitimacy, of control over human beings who are have just as much inalienable God-given rights as anybody else on earth. But that's part of the conversation that gets me fired up. Is it's not just about money. It's not just about the economy or how much you'll be able to buy in 10 years after whatever crazy thing happens. If you're someone who has some serious doubts about how the world is being run, how the world banks are technically the leaders of the world, how we're so distracted by the presidential race that we forget about all the other things going on. If you're really one of the types of people who's really questioning the sort of construction of reality around us, that quote unquote authority figures are, just hoping to God that we buy into, or hoping to Lucifer, or hoping to whoever they hope to, then it might be time to just take a second look at who's pulling our strings and in some of the most important issues of individual lives. I mean, I hate to make money such a big issue, but really the reality is, if you're looking for just some sort of independence from, daddy or mommy America, I'm not saying you have to go buy a Bitcoin, but certainly question who's benefiting from you, refusing to learn the facts and the philosophies behind it. The philosophy is what's, really gets me fired up. Yeah. So anyways, there's my rant.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Well,
go ahead, Jay.
You could think about risks too. I mean, the risk versus reward is worth it, but the risks are low. If Bitcoin did begin to drop, you have the freedom to sell it. Nobody's going to force you to keep it. Yeah. So if you wanted to, you could sell your Bitcoin. And at the same time, the reward, I think, outweighs the risks, and the risks are fairly low. So you also have a lot of, I think people overlook the fact that they have risks keeping it where it is. Like if you don't have Bitcoin, you're really running the risk of missing out on the next paradigm.
And you're probably spending it. It's much easier to, if you're just keeping cash around, it's much easier to accidentally spend a little bit too much on Christmas presents, or, stretch a little bit further on your new car with just a little bit bigger payment. For me, one of the great things about, setting up a regular investment plan just in general is keeps me under control, man. Keeps you from focusing too much on increasing your current lifestyle versus your future self.
Yeah, definitely. It's I've learned a lot about investing, and just especially with having a couple additional children in recent years, thinking about what world they will live in, unless Christ returns. But I'm not going to necessarily just go live out in the woods. Can't do that with kids and stuff. I guess you could. You want to be abusive parent, but
doesn't make it any easier. That's for sure.
No. But another criticism that I often hear is, what government can shut it down. Kind of like how gold was confiscated in 1930. We're not only are we past that. Let me give you a story here that was published on. This is on decrypt.co. The U.S. won't ban, this is published today. The U.S. won't ban Bitcoin, says OCC's Brian Brooks. That's the U.S. comptroller of the currency. And he promised a lot of good news for crypto by the end of Donald Trump's term, which I don't know what that means, if it means 1 month or 4 years from now. And it says, in brief, acting comptroller of the currency Brian Brooks said the regulators, quote, are focused on not killing the crypto industry. U.S. regulators also have no plans to ban Bitcoin, he reassured. Also hinted at some very positive messages for crypto by the end of Trump's term. And Brian Brooks was one of the head lawyers for Coinbase before he became the U.S. comptroller of currency, which is basically the guy that goes around and just makes sure that the currency is operating like it's supposed to. It's a crypto guy. So I don't think they're going to ban it, and they realize they can't really ban it is, I think, the point. And so that
it's
criticism,
unenforceable.
right, that criticism is sort of out the window. It's more about how governments are going to adopt it, and bringing it back to that conversation of CBDCs, which is the central bank digital currencies, and other government issued currencies or corporate issued currencies. The concern there, and to your point, Basil, earlier about how you're afraid that people are just going to be like, hey, I have a whole bunch of Facebook DM coins. I'm in crypto now. The concern is that when they start to realize, oh, wait a minute, I think I should get into something a little bit more robust like Bitcoin. Now, if you go from DM to Bitcoin, not only is Facebook going to be able to make a little money off that exchange, but they have all the data, and they know that you went off DM to get into Bitcoin. And so they will have a record of how much you own. Not that they can't do that now. They probably could if they really wanted to. But they have a much easier ledger to track all that stuff. So, and that's the same thing with CBDCs. These central banks will know if you go from some kind of central bank digital currency into Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, they will know how much you own, and then they'll be able to track you because they have a profile on you. And so, cryptocurrency itself mostly is pretty benign. It's not like evil or good or whatever. It's just currency. It's a medium of exchange. Right. How it's utilized, how it's monitored, and how that information is used against us, that's a whole separate conversation that obviously there's concerns there if you want to talk about concerns. But again, the system has already been built with a lot of that in play, and this is an opportunity to, at least for a little bit, maybe not forever, but at least for a little while, get off of it and perhaps help people out around the world that are otherwise in shambles. And, it's one of those things, for example, if you want to send a few $1,000s to a pastor in Africa to help him build a well or something like that, you try to do that through the SWIFT system, which is the current system to send money overseas. They're going to take a whole bunch of money out of it. It's going to take forever. It's going to take weeks. With Bitcoin, it's like 10 minutes for a block to verify, and you can send money to whoever in the world. Now, I understand there's that, one world currency type of fear that can be associated with that, but because there's no central entity controlling it, you can't really say that it's that yet. Again, it could get to the point where something like that takes place, but those are things to keep in mind when it comes to the pros and cons. Like, I understand the cons. Like, I've processed a lot of the potential downfalls of this for a while. And so I've thought through it, and I reserve the right to change my mind on all that. But as of right now, a lot of my theories about it have been proven correct. And earlier this year, I think in May, I said Bitcoin will probably hit near all-time highs or break all-time highs by the end of the year this year. And so far, I've been pretty spot on, just because you can see how much the institutional people were coming into it. And I don't think we've even started. I think we're going to go on like a 2-year bull run at the very least, where the blow off top won't be in dollar terms. And that's the other point I wanted to make before I throw it back to you, Jay. But, we often think about all this in terms of dollar, like how many dollars is it? What's the kind of dollars that I can make and whatever. And what Bitcoin has done for me anyway is to start thinking differently in terms of the denomination of money, because as I showed this chart here for anyone watching, the dollar purchasing power of the dollar has gone down dramatically. That's why things are more expensive today. It's not that things are worth more. It's a candy bar in the 20s or something was a few cents. And now it's $3. It's not because candy is worth like 100 times more. It's because the dollar is worth less, and people don't think about it that way. And so, that's why I live in California, and a lot of people are like, man, everything's so expensive here. And it's like, yeah, our dollar is devalued here more than other parts of the country. That's what's going on. So it helped me think differently about how things are denominated. And it's a kind of a common thing that Bitcoiners say all the time, but one Bitcoin is worth one Bitcoin. You can't change the amount. You can't change the value of one Bitcoin. The purchasing power may fluctuate over time, but in terms of the value of one Bitcoin, it's still one Bitcoin. You can make the same argument about the dollar, but they're printing more and more dollars. And you talk about supply and demand. Supply keeps going up, so the value of each dollar keeps going down. And so, it's just kind of basic economic stuff that I didn't learn growing up, that I have been able to learn because of Bitcoin. So, yeah.
I'm just going to have to jump in here real quick and apologize. I'm going to have to log off here in a second.
Yeah, so do I. I got to get going too. But
I apologize for that. I could just keep talking about this stuff all night long. Jay, do you want to have some famous last words?
Yeah, I would say that, again, if you watch that Michael Saylor interview that I shared on my community tab on my channel, it's a really good hour-long interview. And I think the logic that he lays down related to energy transfer, closed systems, usury, debt, freedom, all of that's pretty solid. Just go watch that interview. I don't see anybody can disagree with the arguments he makes there. They're pretty simple. Once you kind of get past that learning curve, the simplicity of Bitcoin is really, I think, one of the biggest selling points. And so, I would just say it's a wise move. But again, I'm not a financial person or advisor.
Right.
I'm just a nerd who studies things on the internet. And you can buy my books at my website, signed copies, if you want to wake up your friends and family. jaysanalysis.com. You can go to the shop and you can get my 2 books that deal with symbolism in film. So I get deep into movie symbolism, esoteric whatnot in the movies, predictive programming. You can also subscribe to my site there. I have a archive, subscription-based archive and all that. And then I typically, about once a week, host the 4th hour of the ALEX Jones Show.
Nice. Yeah, make sure to do that, everybody. Check it out. Jay, it's always a pleasure talking to you, buddy. I'm glad we could connect again. Absolutely. And so
hey, thank you. You guys really knew what you were talking about. You guys are more educated than me on this topic, so thank you for having me on to discuss it and teach me things.
Booyah! You heard it here first, folks. That's going on the cover. That's going in the trailer, Jay. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Canary Cry Radio. Make sure to check out Jay Dyer. And other than that, Gonz, I think it's time for us to go to bed.
Yep. I think we got to sign off.
Not together.
Jay signed off, and it messed up the way you look on the screen. You're half.
Oh, no.
You're half green screen. It's all falling apart over there. But
sabotage. You just had to get one last jab in there. Well, that's okay. I'll let Jay sabotage me any day. Okay, Gonz. Well, what do you think? We all done?
Yep. Just wanted to say that none of this stuff, Bitcoin is not going to save you. It's not going to save your soul. There's only one way that takes place, and that's through Jesus Christ. We've known that. And we've preached that, and we will continue to preach that. So don't think that we're sitting here thinking that Bitcoin's gonna give you eternal life, because it's not. It's just a thing that we like talking about, and like Jay said, we're nerds, and
it's just a fun thing to play with during your time here on Earth. You know, we're given these dollar bills with all sorts of occult imagery, and we are forced to bend the knee to the world system. We might as well play around with something that's an alternative while we're here. Not that it all matters eternally, but we got to spend the time somehow.
Yeah, until I come out with my whole thesis, Gonz Eternal.
Gonz Eternal. All right. Well, I got to get out of here.
Yep,
so
me too.
Thanks again, everybody. Here's the thing. You can become a producer of the show by heading to, right now, our Canary Cry Radio website is down. But if you believe that advertising companies should not determine the value of the media you consume, and you would like to have a little bit more control of that, you can become a producer of the show, because we're on the value for value model. Right now, the best place to do that is at canarycrynewstalk.com/support, just because we're having to reroute some website stuff, because this canarycryradio.com is down.
This would have been a great time to tell people to go to canarycryradio.com/crypto, but yeah.
But that's down also.
That's down also.
But there you go. If you want to become a producer of the show, head to Canary Cry Radio. No, don't do that. CanaryCryNewsTalk.com/support. We'll pop it in the chat there. And if you want to hear Gonz and I again, we will be back on Monday, December 7th with the Canary Cry News Talk. If you haven't checked out that show, you definitely should do that. And there you go. Any last words? Did I already ask that?
I think that's it. Have a great weekend, everybody.
There we go. God bless you all, and thanks for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. Make sure to tune in next time. But until then, think outside the cage.
But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be.
Shoo, hallelujah.